Ding!
Hey movie fans, welcome to another episode of Movie Toast. I'm Drew Graber and this is the show where we celebrate movies one drink at a time. But today we aren't going to be celebrating a movie, we are going to be celebrating a man. Stan Lee unfortunately passed away this week at the age of 95, and we are going to celebrate his life and his many accomplishments over the years. Stan Lee was the creator and co-creator of some of the most iconic superheroes in comic book history, including Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, Black Panther, and the X-Men. All of these superheroes that we have grown to know and love through comic books, TV shows, and now the cinematic universe is all due in part to the great Stan Lee.
100 years from now, if somebody should bring up my name, if it would still be around in 100 years, it would be nice if people say, geez, I thought he was a good writer. His stories gave me a lot of pleasure. That's what people tell me now, and it's the best thing any writer can ever hear.
Stan Lee was a true hero to us all. He was the king of comics, and he gave us deeper and more complex world of superheroes to enjoy over the last 60 years. He wore many hats while working at Marvel Comics, but remained a public figurehead for the company and all of his creations, as well as taking part in the cinematic adaptations, making cameos and assisting in whatever way he could to help the world further enjoy the wonderful characters and worlds he created. He was originally born as Stanley Martin Lieber on December 28, 1922 in Manhattan of New York City. As a child, Lee found much enjoyment and inspiration from books and movies, specifically movies starring Errol Flynn, who played many heroic roles in his films in the 1920s and 1930s. Stan Lee graduated from high school at the early age of 16 in 1939 and went on to explore a career in the arts. Just out of high school, Lee managed to land a job as an assistant at Timely Comics, a small division of Pulp magazine, which would later grow to become what we now know today as Marvel Comics. It wasn't long after starting where Lee got his comic book debut with Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge, a fill piece in Captain America Comics number 3, which also introduced Cap's famous ricocheting shield throw. It was also the first time he used the pen name Stan Lee. He would later go on to drop the surname Lieber altogether and adopt Stan Lee as his actual name. Quickly rising through the ranks, by 1941, Lee had gone to write actual comics, even co-creating his first superhero, the Destroyer, in Mystic Comics number 6, and was promoted to interim editor at just 19 years old. But in 1942, Lee left Timely Comics to enter the United States Army during World War II, where he worked in the training film division. He worked on writing slogans and creating training films for the U.S. Army. He eventually returned from his services in 1945 after the war as interim editor at the newly named Atlas Comics. But in the 1950s, DC Comics had begun to make its stride, updating and improving upon their older heroes and starting the Silver Age of comics with the Justice League of America. With their competitors on the rise, Lee was tasked with creating a superhero team of his own. Lee, however, decided he didn't want to do the same thing as DC. He wanted to create something new, a superhero with naturalistic flaws, something to make them human, rather than the near-perfect individuals of most superheroes to date. This was the birth of Marvel Comics. Teaming up for the first time with the famed artist Jack Kirby, together they created the Fantastic Four in 1961. And thus was history as Kirby and Lee continued to co-create the Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, and the X-Men. He also briefly teamed up with Bill Everett to create Daredevil, and he teamed up with Steve Ditko to create Doctor Strange and most famously Spider-Man, Marvel's most famous and most popular character of all time. The best part of it is that they all lived in a shared universe, an expansive franchise, one of the very first, created by Stan Lee. With the growing popularity of all their characters, Lee and Kirby assembled to create the Avengers, a crossover team of some of their most iconic characters, even reviving Captain America to be a part of the team. One thing Marvel had over DC was the idea that comics didn't just have to be for kids. They could have complex, well-written stories with multi-dimensional characters grounded by their humanity and flaws. And this is all due to Stan Lee. Stan Lee was also one of the first to introduce the credit panel in comics, giving credit to all those involved and not just the penciler and the writer. In the late 1960s, Marvel began taking its stride as Spider-Man became Marvel's most successful and popular character, just ahead of the Fantastic Four. And Lee and Kirby continued to collaborate on more of Marvel's most prized and central characters, such as the Black Panther. This was also around the time where Lee adopted his famous motto, Excelsior, using it to sign off on promotional columns for Marvel.
This was aged for 1,000 years. The barrels built from the wreck of Grunhill's fleet is not meant for mortal men.
Neither was Omaha Beach, Blondie. Stop trying to scare us. Come on.
All right.
Excelsior.
In 1972, Lee had risen to publisher of Marvel Comics, where he would continue to lead a talented team of writers and artists to create the wonderful and iconic worlds of Marvel we have come to know and love today. He became the man synonymous with the brand, the household name, the legend. After leaving Marvel Comics in the late 90s, he still stayed with the company in some way or another. He would later make appearances at comic book conventions, interviews, lectures, and panels about his universe, and even later on he would make some of the most memorable characters in the film adaptations based on his own creations.
Lee never stopped believing in his characters, and he never stopped wanting to create new and entertaining content for his loving and adoring fans. This is something he cherished his entire life. The love of telling stories and the joy it brought to millions, billions of people all over the world. There could never be another like Stan Lee. Thank you, Stan Lee. Thank you for all the amazing characters and stories you have brought us over the years. You will be missed by us all. Here's to you, Stan. Cheers. And Excelsior.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.